And we are live. G'day everyone, Mike Jeffrey here, and you are listening to My Creative Journey, episode number 31. To all you new listeners out there, hello, and thank you so much for taking the time to stop by here today. As I said, my name is Mike, and I'm a wedding photographer from Sydney, Australia. Each week on the show, I bring you guys along on the highs and lows of my own creative journey, and share all the knowledge that I've gained along the road to building my own freelance business. In this week's episode, we're talking about perfectionism, the good, the bad, and the ugly. But before we jump into that, let's talk about what has been going on for me this past week. And this past week, not a great deal has been going on. We have been in lockdown. Still, as you guys are aware, as we're recording this, still in lockdown. We don't know how long that's going to go for, but we're not going to touch on that too much today. We're going to talk about some of the sort of positive things that have been going on this past week. And first, I want to touch on the video podcast, which is something that we started last week. I'm not sure if you guys actually got a chance to go and actually watch the video version of this podcast, but it started last week, and that was really sort of promising to see that I was able to really get that up and running. It was a bit more of a sort of hassle for me to have to edit that as well, but it actually really turned out to be not as much of a drama as I was expecting it to be. So I think that's going to be something good going forward, that we can continue to move on. As I said, I was wanting something bit more of a challenge for me, but also I think it's going to be good in actually promoting this podcast and getting it out there to more people, which I think in the end is the goal, and the end is to be able to help as many people as possible. So hopefully getting that out there to as many people as I can is going to be a really good way to get this podcast sort of growing and expand that audience. But a few people have already watched it over on YouTube. If you're here watching this video on YouTube at the moment, thank you so much for tuning in, and it's great to see that people are actually taking it up in that video format and enjoying it in that medium, which is strange for me because I've never been someone who actually watches a whole podcast on YouTube. It's never been something for me. I'm more into the audio version. I like to listen to podcasts as I'm exercising, as I'm working from home, as I'm driving, as I'm anywhere in the world. So I like to have my earphones in and just listen to podcasts. But if you're someone that likes to sit down overnight or through the day in the morning and actually watch a podcast on the TV or on your computer, then that is great as well. And I'm glad that I can open up that form of actually communicating this through that medium. So that has been really nice as well. I think one of the big downsides of recording a podcast, and one of the things that I knew was going to be a bit of an issue, is that there's always a lot more preparation that's going to go into getting something up like that. So for me, the podcast in the early days, I didn't want to put a video podcast in there because I knew it would be a big hurdle, and there was already enough hurdles I had to jump over to get this podcast produced. So having to learn how to edit a podcast, how to record a podcast in the beginning was something that was very challenging and something that I didn't know much about in the beginning. But now adding in that extra component has been good. But one of the downsides, I think, to that is having to get dressed to actually get on actually being on camera to record these podcasts. It's normally something that I do turn up in the afternoon and just sit down and record a podcast. Don't have to worry about how I look at all. Obviously, I don't really care that much, but I think to some extent it has to be presentable to someone. So making sure that I'm actually out of my pajamas for the day would be nice, and coming to sit down here and looking semi-presentable is one of those things that I was aware of, but I think it is going to be more of a hassle and having to plan out when I actually record the podcast in my week and in my days to make sure that I'm actually looking somewhat respectable and not in the afternoon when sometimes I can get a bit dragged down and I've already done a lot of work through the day and not be looking at my best. So this one, I'm recording this episode in the morning at the moment, which is a bit of a change for me. I normally record podcasts in the afternoon, but it's been really hot in the office here this past week, and because the sun comes through the window in the mornings and really heats it up by the afternoon. So I sit here and just sweat recording the podcast, and that is not something that anyone wants to have to sit through half hour to 45 minutes of if you are watching the video. So recording this one in the morning because it is a lot more comfortable. So thank you so much if you are watching the video podcast, but also thank you if you've been tuning into the audio version as well. It's been really great to see a lot of people actually tuning in, and hopefully I'm able to provide value through this lockdown. But if you're out of lockdown as well, hopefully I'm providing just as much value as ever. So that has been really nice. One of the other things that I've been spending a lot of time on through the past week is I've noticed myself being on my phone a lot more through this past week. And that is something that I suppose I started to notice it because it's not something that I used to do a lot of before. I think being someone who tries to stay productive and tries to use their time in the best way that I possibly can, I never found myself being on my phone a lot before, but now being in lockdown, I've found myself more and more on my phone, and that is something that I'm trying not to be super harsh on myself about, because I know that we are in lockdown at the moment, and I know that I don't quite have as much work at the moment as I ever did. So being able to be okay with that, and okay with the fact that I can spend a bit of time on my phone, which is okay to be not super harsh on myself and spending that time in an unproductive way. Trying to use that time as best I can, I guess, and not use it to sort of refresh myself and get ready for the next day, because I think this time in lockdown has been hard, and I haven't been able to go out and do the things that I necessarily would do to be able to refresh myself and enjoy interacting with other people and spending time with other people. So that has been sort of a substitute. I think one of those negatives, though, is that not a lot of people are actually updating on social media anymore, because there's not much happening in the world. And I found that I started to become sort of annoyed with the fact that there's not much there and no one's really putting anything out in the world. I'm trying to reach out to as many friends as possible to get those updates from people and see what they're up to. But not a lot of people have been updating on social media, because I think that is that highlight reel that we have discussed, that people only post the best of the best. And in lockdown, there's not much that is the best. So people haven't been actively posting on there. I've been trying to put as much of myself out there as possible to say that it's okay to be a bit stressed, a bit underworked, a bit just using your time however you want to in lockdown, because I think it's about normalizing it and showing that it is okay in these moments in time when you may not have as many things to do as possible. I've always been someone with that mentality that if I have all this spare time, I have to use it to my best advantage, take advantage of the time that I have and use it in the most productive manner that I possibly can. But I think over the past month, it sort of showed me that isn't always the case. And sometimes it's okay to slow down. It's okay to take a bit of a break. It's okay to not be so harsh on yourself and think that you need to constantly be producing more and more and sort of growing. I think you are in the background always going to be continue to grow, regardless of whether you think you are or regardless of whether you think the actions that you're taking are actually growing yourself. You may actually be growing in another way. And I think coming out of this lockdown, we'll have learned a lot about ourselves, being able to just spend time on our own and spend time with our own thoughts and things like that. So we don't need to be growing in other areas as well. There's no sense me trying to put pressure on myself to grow a business at the moment when my business isn't able to happen. I'm not able to go out and actually take photos of people and actually go to weddings and things like that. So putting pressure on myself to improve that business is sort of a null and void when I can't actually do anything. So having pressure isn't helping at all. And allowing myself time to sort of sit back and think, what else can I do and where else can I improve myself and what else can I be thinking about and what else can I be doing to occupy my time, rather than just sitting here stressed about the amount of things that I should be doing. It's been good to see a lot of people like starting their own sort of podcasts and starting their own YouTube channels and starting new Instagram accounts and other social medias like that, and then trying to sort of create something with the time that they have and try to use it to be something else. And I think being able to put energy into something else really is really important, and using this time to experiment in something new when you do have free time, I think is super important. And it's important to put yourself out there into things that you may not have possibly had time for before. It's great to see a lot of people starting a podcast in isolation or in lockdown, because it's something that people probably wouldn't perceive as something that they have time to do otherwise. So it's good to see people putting time into things that before previously they didn't have time for, didn't perceive themselves to have time for, and didn't allocate the time properly. Now they do have the time, and it's good to see people trying to do that. But don't be so harsh on yourself if you're not actively striving to do things like that, and don't be so harsh on yourself if you think you haven't achieved anything. Of course, you are achieving things even when you think you're not actually achieving anything tangible. You still may be achieving things in your own mind and in your own headspace and your own mentality moving forward. Speaking of things that I have been working on, one thing that I have been working really hard at over the past 2 weeks is my new print store. So this is something that I've discussed in the past couple of episodes, and I'm sure you guys are interested in an update on that. We do now have a date that we are launching, which is Tuesday the 24th, which this episode will come out Tuesday the 23rd, so that will be tomorrow. If you're listening to this episode on the first day that it comes out, it's launching tomorrow night at 6 o'clock. So be sure to check that out, and I will leave a link for it in the description of this podcast down below, whether you're on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, it'll all be there in the description. I've been working really hard on this and trying to get it back up and running. It's been something that I did last year, and I sort of launched it. I've spoken about it on this podcast a number of times about how that really didn't go the way I wanted to, and I really wanted to bring this back as something because I feel like my art is starting to become up to a standard where I'm happy to get it out there, and that is in itself my own sort of beliefs holding me back in that sort of way. So I'm trying to put it out there and trying to just leave it up to other people. If other people are interested in buying my work, then that's great. And if they're not, then that's great as well, because at least I'm learning something, I'm achieving something by actually getting it out there, and it's helping me grow my own mentality on whether I think that these things should be out there in the world, because it is something that I have struggled with before, to put things out there in the world. So this is a big step to actually get something out there online, something tangible that people can actually get a piece of my artwork and think that people could actually have that in their own home is amazing. So to be able to get that out there has been really nice, and it's been really nice to work on that. And I've been learning a great deal this time, and sort of using a lot of the strategies that I had last time and sort of implementing those and sort of growing it and expanding on what I had last time. And there are going to be a few little things, and there are going to be things that are completely different in this time than there were last time. For example, one of the big things that is going to change this time to last time is this print store is only going to be open for 1 week. So the store itself is only open for 1 week. So it'll only be open until the end of August. So if you're listening to this after August 2021, then the print store is probably closed, but it will be open up again, I'm sure, later on in the future. But for the exact moment, it's only going to be open for a week. So leaving it, having a bit of time limit on people to actually order, I think is important, because last time I just left it open and it sort of ended off, and there wasn't as much effort from me being placed into it, and I wasn't able to give 100% of myself every single week and turn up and keep advertising it all the time. So this is a more strategized effort, I guess, into how I can direct my sort of marketing and how I can advertise it only being open for a week, and then afterwards I can put all the orders in and spend sort of that 2-week period having that all ready to go, and then afterwards I'm done. And then I can come back to it later on and don't need to stress about it in the back of my mind. I don't want anything else being there, sort of adding extra space or adding extra things that I need to be thinking about. So this is going to be a real sort of targeted effort, and having it open for just a week is one of those ways. And I'm sure I'm going to discuss heaps of the other things that I am going to do later on. I'm going to make a whole podcast about this relaunch of my print store, and that is going to be something that I do dive in a bit deeper on, because I know there are people out there trying to launch things as well and launch their own products, and I'm no expert at this, but I think I can provide some sort of value, because I think going through this has taught me a lot, and I'm sure there are people out there who would love to know some of the strategies that I've been using and some of the things that I've been sort of experimenting with in trying to get this out there. Another thing for all the listeners or viewers of this podcast, I would love to offer you the chance to actually go and view my print store early. So if you are listening to this podcast, it is actually open at the moment. You can go to mikejeffreyphotography.com/fine art prints, and you will find it there. I'll leave the link in the description, as I said, but you'll find the print store open. It is open early. I won't be announcing it till tomorrow night, but it is open now. And also, if you guys are listening, you are obviously someone who has really appreciated the work that I've done and really appreciated my services and the things that I've been able to provide, and really been supporting me as an artist. So I would love to offer an early sort of run to you guys and give you the chance to be able to get in there and grab some of those prints. If you're interested, you obviously don't have to, but I think it's something that a lot of people have been asking me for, and a lot of your listeners of this podcast and a lot of people who do support my work very closely are here on this podcast, I'm sure. So I'd love to give you guys the option to go in early. And if you do order anything, I am running a pre-sale at the moment with a few people, other supporters of my work and you guys on the podcast. So be sure to use the discount code at checkout, pre-sale 20, and you'll get 20% off your order if you're interested in ordering anything. And that is only until 6 p.m. tomorrow night. So if you're listening to this podcast after that, I'm sorry, it has expired, and hopefully the print store is still open for another week, but I'm running this pre-sale for 36 hours, and that's all it's going to be. I've advertised it to some other people as well. You may have already seen it on Instagram and things like that. So if you're interested, jump in before 6 o'clock tomorrow night. You can get that 20% off using the code presale20. If not, it's still going to be open for another week, and all those images are there if you guys want to go have a look. If you want to just go have a look from your own perspective of seeing what it's like to actually get something out there, I think that's important as well. I know I've been someone who actively looks at what other people are putting out there in the world, because it gives me ideas and gives me things and sort of motivates me to continue on. So I hope that if in anything, it's able to motivate you to get something out there as well. So yeah, the print store is open at mikejeffreyphotography.com/fineartprints. And remember to use that discount code presale20 at the checkout if you want to get 20% off your order before 6 p.m. on Tuesday, the 24th of August. It'll only be open until the 31st of August. So the end of the month, it'll be expiring and the print store won't be open again. It'll probably be open again towards the end of the year, but this is the only time for the next couple of months anyway. But now we're going to jump into today's episode. I don't want to drag this one out to be a long one. I know I've said that before. I really want to have shorter episodes, but I feel like every time I say that, it ends up dragging into one of the longest episodes that I've had. But this one is a really interesting one today and something that I've been wanting to talk about a lot. And I think it reflects back on me actually launching this print store. And that was one of the reasons why I wanted to make this episode, because it's been something that I've struggled with for the longest time, is perfectionism. And that has really held me back in the past. So I really want to make an episode about it today. I also think that it's something that's growing in the world today as we do sort of transition to be more online, more on social media and things like that. I think perfectionism is becoming something that is impacting a lot of people more these days than it did in the past. And so I really want to touch on it. And I've heard a lot of people speak about it recently, and something that I think directly impacts me, but I think directly impacts a lot of people. So I think hopefully I can provide some sort of value through this episode. Perfectionism can be such a good and a bad thing, and I'm going to touch on both of those today. I'm going to be talking about some of the positive aspects, some of the negatives, but then I also want to touch on some of the solutions and some of the things that we can do to sort of negate the impact of perfectionism, and some of the things we can help to overcome it in our own creative lifestyle. I think it's something that does hold a lot of creative people back, holds a lot of people back in a lot of different areas, but I'm going to touch on mostly today from a creative aspect, because that is what we do tend to speak about here on this podcast. And I'm going to use that from my own personal experience, but also touch on some things that I've heard from other people and things that I think genuinely do impact a lot of people. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to touch on the pros and cons. And I'm going to talk about some of the positives and negatives that I think do come about through perfectionism. And then after we do that, we're going to touch on the solutions. So some of the things that can help in those negative aspects, when it is a negative thing, some things that can help, sometimes when it is a positive thing as well, it can easily turn into a negative if you're not careful and not actually looking out for it. So we're going to touch on some of the solutions as well. And then the third thing I'm going to do is we're going to relate it back to some sort of case study that I have in my own life, and going to talk about some of the things that I've gone through, especially in launching my own print store. So we're going to touch on that and touch on a couple of things in perfectionism and how it's really impacted me there. But firstly, we're going to jump into some of the pros and cons. And I don't always think that perfectionism is a negative thing. I don't think it's always such a negative. I think for me, it's helped me over the years to have a lot of pride in my own work, and helped me to push through hard times and work harder and overcome adversity. I think being a perfectionist can really help in those aspects, because you really want to get in and get something done. You can really strive in a positive way to really strive for perfection. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. If you want things to be perfect, that's not bad. If you're striving to be there, I think we should all be striving to be as great as we possibly can be. I think when it becomes a negative, it can be very harmful. But in most aspects, if you're striving to be the best version of yourself than you possibly can be, I don't think that's a negative thing. And I think that can be a very strong motivator for you. And a lot of people find that internal motivation, and that's great, because too many people, I think, also need external motivating. So if you can find it within yourself to motivate yourself, whether that is through perfectionism or anything else, if you can find that within yourself, I think that's a really positive step and something that you can use to drive yourself and overcome adversity, as I said. So that is a genuine thing that a lot of people use. And I know that it's really helped me over the years, being that sort of perfectionist and really wanting to be constantly improving and wanting to be better. And I think that is never something that should be taken as a negative, although it can turn negative and can quickly change if you're not in control of it, if you're not careful of the ways that your perfectionism can manifest itself. And so then touching on some of the negatives, I think it can allow you to be more focused on avoiding failure and not actually have an emphasis on success. I think a lot of people turn it around to be a negative thing because they're constantly scared of the failure rather than aiming for the success. So it's great to go against failure, but we need to be going towards success rather than away from failure. And if you're constantly having the idea of failure in your mind, that's when perfectionism can start to become a negative thing, because it's holding you back. You're still thinking about where you're thinking about all the negative aspects and pushing away from the negatives rather than going towards all the positive things. And striving for those positives is where, as I said, it can be a very, very rewarding thing and can help you to overcome things. It can help you to achieve more if you're constantly striving for achieving those positive things. But if you're constantly holding on to the negatives, that's when it's going to start to become hard, and you'll never really put work out there in the world because you'll be scared that there is going to be negative aspects and people are going to see the negatives rather than focusing on the positives. So holding yourself to that standard and only seeing negative things, I think, is one of the real bad ways, and it can get out of control if you're not able to see when it is starting to become that, when it's not just the positive things anymore, when you're starting to hold on to the negatives and see the negatives in everything. That is when it can be really hard, and you'll never be able to put yourself out there to allow yourself to be judged. And I think that's really important. I think we've spoken about that before on the podcast, and allowing yourself to be judged, allowing yourself to put work out there in the world. And I think that is one of the things that it does hinder is being able to put things out there in the world, because you're so scared of those negatives. You're scared of being held back by any sort of failures that you may have, rather than striving to be successful as you possibly can. I think one of the other big things that it stops is it stops you from trying new things, as I said, but it also limits your creativity. And that's one of the big downsides in any sort of creative field is having that perfectionism hold you back, because it stops you from trying new things, which inevitably is going to limit creativity. You're never going to be as creative if you're always sticking to the same thing, if you're always constantly trying to do the same thing because you know it's worked in the past, if you're just trying to create this perfect version of something that you've seen before. You're never going to be as creative because you're scared to take another step because of the fear that it could be bad, the fear that you could actually fail in that moment, and the fear that that failure is therefore impacting you directly and actually has a negative connotation on you as an artist or as a person, and not seeing that as some form of success that you can learn from that failure. So that is the way that I think it's held me back most in the past, is sort of limiting the creativity that I have and stopping me from trying to do new things. I think the idea of perfection, I think, can hold people and can sort of define someone. If their internal dialogue is only telling them that they have to be perfect, then that can easily define you. And if you produce something that's not perfect, then it'll never go out there in the world. And I think that is the underlying definition of being a perfectionist. And I think that is something that a lot of people would immediately first think of, is that if it's not perfect, they can't put it out there in the world. And that is something that defines them, that if it's not perfect, well, it can't be anything associated with them. So moving away from that, and you can sort of lose control of your work and of being able to put things out there in the world if you're not careful. So those are some of the negative things that can start to bring you down. I now really want to touch on some solutions, because I think whilst there are a lot of positive things associated with being a perfectionist, as I spoke about before, it's really helped me in the past. I think it can be a slippery slope, and it can turn to a negative quite quickly if you allow it to get out of control. And I think using some of these techniques can be very proactive and can stop you sliding down that slope to where it becomes a negative, but it also can be a very reactive way to sort of pick yourself up when you do notice that it's starting to become a bit of a problem. And I think that's probably more important, is making sure that you do pick yourself up when you do notice it starting to become a bit of a problem, because if you go too far, it can become quite hard to dig yourself back out, and it's going to take a lot of work. So noticing some of those traits and noticing yourself thinking that everything has to be perfect, I think, is a good first step, but then putting some things in place that you can do. One of the biggest things that's helped me, I know I've spoken about it in the past couple of weeks, I've been starting where I've been editing all my photos every morning. So I've been trying to sit down at the computer and actually give time to edit. So I'm giving a sort of time limit to actually producing work rather than a sort of quality limit. And the quantity over quality thing is something that I've spoken about before, and that I'm trying to produce as much work as I possibly can in the order to create the best quality that I possibly can. Through producing art, I feel like the quality of my art is therefore improving. So giving myself that time limit to actually produce and come up with something is allowing me in the long run to increase the actual quality of my work. If I was just striving for perfectionism, I'd only producing an artwork, say, every month or so, because I want that to be perfect, and I would spend out all my time and effort making that one thing perfect. there isn't as much iteration in that. So there's not as much opportunity for you to grow. There's not as much opportunity for you to be creative. There's not as much opportunity for you to actually improve because you're not actually seeing anything outside of the one piece you're working on. For example, for me, if I'm working on a few different artworks at a time, if I'm trying to work on a few things every day and trying to update it every day and sit back down here and create a new art piece, every time that I'm creating a new piece, I'm starting off with a different structure. I'm starting off with a different idea. And so I'm learning new things in every artwork. If I was trying to cram everything that I knew into one piece of art, it wouldn't look good and I wouldn't be able to practice everything on one piece of art. A lot of different tricks and tools that I have in my tool belt that I can use in my art and things that I've learnt over the years and things that I know how to do. But I can't possibly cram them all into one piece of art. I can't possibly practice every single thing in one artwork. And it'd be the same in any sort of genre of things you're trying to apply. You can't possibly put everything into one piece. So if you're constantly only working on one piece, you're not practicing a lot of different skills. So it's about sort of practicing that one thing, then moving on. Then next time you come back, you'll remember that one thing because you've used it before, or you've used it pretty recently as well. If I'm working on, say, 5 different artworks a week, then I'm constantly updating the skills that I have and constantly using the skills, so none of them ever go sort of stagnant in the way that I'm not able to use them anymore. So that allows me to produce more quality over time because I'm using the skills that I have in the here and now. I've been doing a lot with this podcast as well, just releasing episodes every week, trying to not be focused on making them perfect, but try to focus on the quantity of the episodes, and knowing that I've come a long way in the past 6 months in producing these episodes, but I would have never got there if I never released the first episode because I was too focused on that one being perfect, or I wouldn't have never released the 15th episode because I was too worried about that one being perfect. I would have never got to 30. You know, if we don't ever put something out there, we can never have those iterations to improve on things a lot more than they previously were. So being able to put that sort of time limit on yourself and set that constraint rather than the constraint of it being 100% perfect. And then I think it comes into the next point that you need to sort of lower your expectations. Now, I'm not saying that you need to lower your definition of perfect, because I think the definition of perfect is a little bit vague anyway, and no one really sets the definition of perfect. That's all made up in your own head. But if you want to strive to be perfect, which is probably never something you're ever going to achieve, then that's never going to be able to be done. So let's forget about the idea of perfect. Let's just leave that alone. But then set your own definitions of where you need to be. Strive for something below perfect and really set yourself a goal of that. If you have in your own head a definition of what you think perfect is, then probably come down to 80% of that and come and try and work at 80% of your perfect. Try to get to that standard, because that is a lot more achievable. And by achieving that is going to be a lot more rewarding in the long run because you're actually achieving your goal. You're never going to get to perfect, but maybe if we come back from perfect and not change your definition of perfect, because that is something that's going to be too hard to change and you've locked that in. You know what your perfect is, and your perfect changes over time. Remember, depending on how good you are, depends on what your perfect is. So as you improve, your definition of perfect is going to continue to grow, so you're never going to reach it. But let's come back to 80% of your perfect and know what that is and try to hit 80% of it. If you can put some sort of target on that, produce work to that standard, and then once it's there, it needs to be exported into the world and it needs to be out there and move on, because you're never going to increase on that, and there's no point. The law of diminishing returns sort of comes in there when you're trying to get things from 80 to 85%, 85 to 90. There's only so much you can do there. You're not learning new skills in that. You're just adding little bits and pieces. The big things are done in that first 80%. All the big skills that you needed to get that work to 80%, all the big tools and all the big tricks you have are done in that first 80%. So moving on once it gets to 80%, because the law of diminishing returns say that you're not going to achieve much more in that last 20%, that you could have spent that time starting a new one and getting it up to 80% in that time. So rebuilding those hard skills and getting them to that 80%, because then that 80% will grow over time. So your 80% is constantly moving because you're producing more work, and that will allow you to decrease those expectations of what you think is perfect, but also allow you to move on so that expectation of perfect can then increase itself over time. Another thing I like to do is to just walk away and come back a bit later. So I've been having this with my editing hour every morning. At the end of the hour, I walk away and I come back tomorrow. And I think it's important to look at things with a fresh set of eyes. It can be very hard when you're entrenched in something and you can see all the negatives in it because you've just been working on it. So you can see what you've done. You can see the changes you've made. You can see the little tweaks you've made here and there. If you walk away from it and come back to it in a week's time, you might think there isn't anything wrong with this because I've now exposed myself to the real world and I've seen a couple of other things in the world. I've come back to it now and all of a sudden it looks okay. It's fine now because I'm not so engulfed in it that I've forgotten what I've done yesterday. I've forgotten what the little things were that I made, what the little things I thought were off. I don't write those down. I go away and come back and see if I still think they're bad. If I still think they're bad, maybe I can change it. Maybe it's not to that 80% standard. But if I think they're good, chances are it's at that 80%. And then I can move on. So I think going away and coming back to anything allows you to be more successful in it. I record this podcast on a Tuesday. I don't edit it till a Thursday or a Friday, and there's a reason for that. I would hate to sit back down straight after recording this and hear it over and over again. That would really annoy me and irritate me a little bit because I don't like to hear the sound of my own voice. So I step away from it for that reason. But also, if I make mistakes in this podcast today and I know that, I really stuffed that part up, by the time I come back on Friday and actually re-listen to it, it might make sense to me. And I might think, I didn't think there was anything wrong with that. And I've forgotten about what the part was that I made a mistake on. So stepping away and coming back and sort of having a look with that fresh set of eyes and thinking, I don't think that actually was that bad. It was just all made up in my own head. I think that's super important to make sure that the work you are doing is from the right perspective, that it is at that 80%, because your idea of 80% when you're at the computer or when you're working on any piece, when you're engulfed in it, you can't have a clear idea of what that 80% is. So stepping away and coming back and then seeing whether you would judge that as being, if it was anyone else's work, would you judge that at being 80% of their perfect or your perfect? And if it is, it needs to get out there in the world. So that is one of the things that I've used as well. I think then one of the next biggest things for me, and one thing that I've constantly struggled with, but I'm trying to learn a lot recently, is to learn how to accept compliments and to learn how to celebrate the small little successes that you have in your own life. I think a lot of people who struggle with perfectionism struggle to actually celebrate the successes that they have because they never think anything is a success. So actively celebrating things with other people, I think, is very important, and being able to put something out in the world and say that you're so proud of something and say that you've really done well on this is a big step for you because it may not be something that you ever normally do. So advertising that it's a big success for you and that you struggle admitting that it's a success is very important because it may never be something that you normally do or never normally think about. So that's a big boundary and a big hurdle to overcome. So being able to accept other feedback of other people as well, I think, is super important. If someone says this is a really good thing you've done here, don't go back at them and say, yeah, but X, Y, and Z was wrong, or I could have done this a bit differently. Yeah, I think it's good in this area, but I probably could have improved on this. Just accept the compliment and just say thank you for that, because that will change your perspective in the long run of what you think other people are expecting. And chances are other people's expectations are a lot more closely aligned to the definition of perfect than yours are, because yours are exaggerated because you're involved in actually producing the work. So your expectations of what perfect is are way elevated and unrealistic. So other people have genuinely a better idea, and you may say that they may not know the intricate details, but they don't need to appreciate something. And if they're appreciating it, then chances are you should be as well. So celebrate those little wins and celebrate the little things and little achievements that you've had. And then the last little practical tip I would say would be to try something new. Try something that you're not perfect at. Try something that you don't know what the definition of perfect is. Try something you know nothing about, because the more you know about something, the more you can define your sense of perfect. So if we're going to try something outside of something that we know where the definition of perfect is, we're always going to think we're improving. It's the same stage of starting any new craft. Early on, there's so much enjoyment in it because you can see yourself constantly improving. You can see your work getting a lot better, and your definition of perfect is way below where it is now. And you're constantly hitting that perfect because every time you don't know where that is and you think, oh, wow, this is amazing. Chances are if you look back on it in a few years' time, it's not going to be as good as you once thought it was, but because your definition was so low, because your expectations were so low, you were able to achieve that a lot more easy. So having something that you don't know what the definition of perfect is, and trying that out and opening yourself up to be wrong, opening yourself up to that sort of failure, but also opening yourself up to success as well, because whilst your definition may be wrong compared to someone who's an expert in that field, you're still allowed to have that success of achieving something in it because of, to your standard, you have achieved something, and that is an overall really a positive thing. And now with some of those solutions out of the way, I want to jump into the third thing that I want to talk about, which is the case study on my print store. Now, this has been something that I've been wanting to launch again for another year. I launched my print store last year, about the same time last year, in September, October last year, and I've been really wanting to relaunch it again. And ever since, I've been wanting to know how I can improve on it and how I can be a lot better. And I think something that has held me back is my own sense of perfectionism and wanting it to be perfect. And I think it did hold me back last year as well. I sort of hung on for a lot of time last year to actually launch that print store. I was originally going to launch it in April, May, and didn't get it out till September and October. And that's something that we can talk about a long time, but I'm glad that it's out now. And I'm glad that I'm now moving on to the next run of that, because if I never got that first one out, I wouldn't be here today. So I'm glad I got that one out, but it did definitely hold me back in that sense of perfectionism. So one of the things that I really wanted it to be, I wanted it to be able to look perfect. I wanted the store to be amazing. I wanted it to not have any mistakes on there, not have any sort of little spelling mistakes, all the images to be the right size. There'd be some sort of consistent flow through the web page and all this sort of stuff. I wanted people to be able to open up the graphics and see it as if it was in their own home, and be able to have all the mock-ups done and all little things, and have all the pricing all right and the descriptions, everything perfect, And at the end of the day, I had to come back and think, well, I'm here by myself. There's only so much I can do. People aren't expecting this launch of my print store to be like Apple launching the new iPhone. People aren't expecting that, because I'm just your one-man band. I don't have a whole team behind me. I don't have a company behind me launching this print store. So there's only so much I can do. At the end of the day, if it's a success if people are able to actually purchase prints on the store, if people can actually run through, if people can actually go to the website and click on something that they like, add it to a cart, add their credit card, order one, I think that's a success. That's a big win, because that's a lot more framework than I had before. And realizing that that was a success was a big step for me, because it was never something that I saw as just being a success, because I looked at other people's print stores, people who'd been in it for years, and thought, I've got to have mine like theirs, or I have to have my website just like any other store online, any other store that sells any other type of product, but not realizing that those people have been in it for years. Those people are big companies. Those people have teams behind them that actually build those websites out. So there's only so much that I can do, and focusing on the product more than the actual store itself is way more important, because at the end of the day, that's what I do. I'm a photographer. I'm not someone who designs websites. So making sure that the art is great is my top priority, and I think that is something that did hold me back, and we'll touch on that. But also spending more time in that rather than focusing on what the store actually looks like, and being that perfectionist and making sure all the words are right. If there's a little spelling mistake, no one's going to say, oh, I'm not going to order off them because they're not, or their spelling's not great. Well, that's not what they're there for anyway. And I think that adds sort of some sort of value, because they're actually saying, well, they're an actual person behind this, and there is someone there that we can relate to, because they've made a mistake just like I probably would. And then on the other side of that, the other thing that I said was that I was held back for a long time because I didn't think anyone would want to actually buy my artwork. I didn't think that it was up to a standard that was actually good enough. And this is a whole other thing that I never thought my work was good enough, but I've had to turn around on that and really be able to put it out there and leave it up to other people, because I was at a point last year where I was getting so many messages from so many people asking if they could actually buy a piece of my artwork, and I was really surprised that anyone would message me and ask that. But then I thought, well, I'm not actually allowing them the chance to actually do that. So why not get it out there in the world and allow people to decide for themselves? If they really want to go purchase a piece of artwork, well, it's there now, and that's not something that I'm holding them back on. It's not something that I'm holding myself back on. I should just be putting it out there in the world, and that's the best way to judge that. That's the best way to allow that to be decided, rather than me, who we've already discussed has inflated ideas of what it needs to be. A lot of other people aren't concerned about all the intricate details of the artwork. They just think it looks quite nice, so they're happy to purchase it. And leaving it up to other people was one of the biggest things that I possibly could have done. And it was one of the best things that I did, because now it's allowed me to put it out there again and know that if last year was some sort of success, if it allowed people to actually view my art and order art online, then my art's only improved since then. So being able to be comfortable with the fact that I can put work out there and know that it's up to some sort of standard and some sort of quality that it can go out there, I think is a great thing. And I'm glad that I'm able to get out there. It is something that did hold me back for a long time and not think my work was good enough. But I think now I've sort of shifted my idea to thinking that it's 80% of the way there. That's as good as it needs to be out there in the world. No one's expecting it to be amazing. No one's expecting it to be perfect. I'm the only one holding myself back on that. And at the end of the day, I need to stop that and be able to realize what it is that is holding me back and be able to push work out there in the world, because in order to grow, we need to get to those next iterations. And this is number 2. Hopefully the next time I launch it, number 3, number 4, it's going to be a lot better. And if I hadn't have ever launched the first one, we would have never been at that iteration. And I may have still been stuck trying to perfect that first one. And I wouldn't be at the level that I am now, because I've learned a lot more new skills in relaunching and in stepping away and heading back into it now with a fresh set of eyes and going back in and seeing all these little things that I wouldn't have seen last time, and seeing how much I didn't need to change from last time, how much of the little things I actually did right the first time, and seeing the mistakes I thought I made weren't actually mistakes. So stepping away and coming back and seeing those things has allowed me to change a lot over the past year, but also has allowed me to grow, and hopefully next time it will only get even better. And so in wrapping up, perfectionism isn't a bad thing. It isn't always a bad thing. I think wanting to produce quality work is important, and that shouldn't be stigmatized as a bad thing, because it can help you to grow. It's helped me a lot. It's helped me to strive to be improving and strive to be better. But we need to know when it starts to get out of control, and we need to be able to take advantage of it for ourselves, to use it in a positive way rather than having it control us, rather than looking at the negatives. Focus more on the positive. Focusing on trying to be perfect is great, but not focusing on all the failures that you may have along the way. Don't be held back by the failures, and try to push towards perfection and push towards being better and improving and being better over time. So that is where I'm going to leave today's episode, guys. I really hope you did enjoy this one. It did drag out for a bit longer than I thought it would, but I think that's valuable information, and I think something that a lot of people are going to take from this, because it's something that I know impacts a lot of people, and hopefully my story can help you guys, and some of the tools and tricks that I spoke about today that have helped me in the past, hopefully they can help you, and hopefully in different aspects of your life, because I know you guys aren't all photographers like me. You're all in any sorts of creative field. You may not even be in a creative field, but I think this thing that is called perfectionism holds a lot of people back in a lot of different areas in life, and something that I think a lot of people can take a lot from and will be able to learn a lot from going forward. So if you did enjoy this episode, I would really appreciate it if you did share this episode around with someone else who you think may enjoy it as well, someone who you think may gain a lot from hearing about this, something you think actually struggles with this sort of stuff, because there are more people out there struggling with this than you would actually realize. And it was one of the big reasons why I wanted to make this episode, because I've been hearing a lot of people talk about it recently, and it's been really helping me. And so I thought I could bring that to this audience and help you guys as well. So if you would share that around with anyone else, I think they would find it very beneficial, but I would also appreciate it so much as well. And it's one of the main reasons why this podcast has been able to grow over the past sort of 30 episodes, is from people sharing episodes around, and I'm so thankful for that. Also, remember that my print store is open at the moment for all the listeners of this podcast. It'll be open until the end of August 2021. So remember that you can hop on there. It'll be in the description below. And if you're interested in purchasing any of those prints, you are able to. And if you're interested in anything about that print store, be sure to send me a message, and I'll be happy to answer any of the questions that you may have about that. But until next week, guys, have a great week, and I will talk to you all again next Monday. Bye.